All right, hello everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Caucus, and the first episode under the new Biden-Harris administration. Woohoo! We honestly, this has been quite a whirlwind week, actually, and I mean, I can't believe it's Thursday already, but I'm also kind of relieved it's already Thursday, and so I'm not going to lie, I'm really tired. And I don't know if it's just kind of this like emotional letdown, just because it's like, oh, like this. I just feel like the sense of relief. Like I don't have to be like hyper vigilant about like, all right, what's the latest shit show on the news now and what's happening? Like today, I went for a run with a friend and I was like, God, it was 2 weeks ago we were out here, like in our cars listening to what was happening in the Capitol, and then getting out of our car and just looking at each other like, oh my God, what just happened? Right. And so now it's like it's just weird that that's just 2 weeks in the past. And now it's kind of like today, 199-page plan on how to address the virus. It's like, who knew? And all I could think about was when Trump went on 60 Minutes and he had like, he hands Leslie Stahl this like big stack of paper, which probably somebody was like, quick, where's the recycle bin? And they go and they like grab a bundle of paper and go over and hand it to her. Like, it's just kind of like, like here's our long con kind of deal. And I just want to say, there's still, that health plan in 2 weeks never did materialize.
Yeah, and we're rejoining the World Health Organization. We're rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. Like we're re-entering the international stage with a cooperative administration. I was actually, listening to NPR in the car, and seriously, for pretty much the entire last 4 years, I would have to skip past NPR because I just couldn't handle how normal they made everything sound. Even though I know probably deep down, a lot of the people on NPR were probably like dying on the inside. I just couldn't handle how normal they were making the Trump administration sound. And so I just did not listen to them for 4 years. Sorry, SDPB, I still sent you money. And then today, they're talking about what's happening in Washington, D.C., and they say president, and like, I definitely mentally paused a little bit because I've been so used to it being the previous administration, and they're like, President Biden, and I'm just like, hallelujah. Like
my husband is joking about like training his phone to not like autocorrect and get it correct, or to like just intuit that that's what he's going to say and like automatically populate it.
Yeah, so it's just like, it's almost surreal. Like I've spent the last 4 years so tuned into national politics in a sense. And it's so weird to, instead of being like, oh God, what's happening, be like, oh, what's happening? And try to like shift my perspective. Because yeah, like, the Biden administration, I know that they are probably a lot more center than a lot of people were hoping for, at least coming out of the Democratic primary. And so there's definitely places where I'm sure I'm not going to agree with President Biden. And that's fine. I'm not concerned that he is going to be fomenting a mob that's going to invade the Capitol and shit on the floors. Like, we can disagree on policy. I'm not concerned that he's going to tear apart the fabric of our democracy. And that's really the difference between the two administrations.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I feel like, and it's just kind of laughable that even from before the election, people would be, just the crazy things people say about like, oh, they're so liberal or whatever. And it's like, well, neither Biden or Harris is like would be somebody who like, if you go ask people like on the far left side of the party, they're going to just laugh. They're like, yeah, no, that's not happening at all. It's just kind of and so, yeah, in some regards, it's like, well, it's just the same, I don't disagree with when people say, well, it's just, it's the same old people. It's kind of like, this isn't, there may not be any major change. And it's like, all right, yeah, I agree. But like, how about we just kind of get back to like the kind of where we can actually have a conversation about things and, actually have policy decisions being made that aren't just like the scorched earth campaign to just ramrod crazy, like racist, just this extremist agenda that's attached to like Christian nationalism and white supremacy and everything else. And so I think that, and especially, I mean, Biden by himself, it's like, okay, whatever. But the fact that he does have Kamala Harris, and let's just take a moment to say, like, she's the first female vice president and the first Black vice president and first Asian American vice president. I mean, there's a whole lot of firsts happening here. The people they've selected for their cabinet, they've nominated a transgender woman for their Secretary of Health. Like, there's just so many firsts going on in this. The changes on their website to be more inclusive, like all of it. I think that, obviously in governance and policy making, there's compromises that inevitably have to happen. And especially with a 50-50 split in the Senate, that's going to be a huge piece. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like they're going, they have a commitment to really trying to make some change. And it's already happened within like the first 24 hours, like just even executive orders to reinstate diversity training for federal employees, or to say that masks are required in federal office buildings. I mean, just these really simple things. And just as a side note, because we do want to talk about what's going on in South Dakota, but I feel like I need to do a little public service announcement, speaking of COVID, because I saw some just stupid tweets today regarding Dr. Fauci. So Fauci obviously was on TV today, and he was interviewed. There was a press conference, and he was talking about, the pandemic. And people are trolling him like, oh, you lied. You said masks don't work. And, so you're a hypocrite, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And I just feel like I need to like say time out, and let's like rewind a year ago, and maybe a year ago, just short of a year ago. So this will be like end of February, and just remember what was happening. So at this point, there's lots of people suddenly getting COVID in Washington State, California. I actually remember seeing the news in January last year and thinking, okay, this is either going to get under control quickly like SARS and MERS did, or this is it. This is the big pandemic that I learned, when I took epidemiology in college in 1995. This is what we were talking about with like emerging diseases and everything else. And sure enough, that's what and I remember being at a Kiwanis meeting in Leeds, South Dakota on like March 3rd and giving a presentation about coronaviruses and like explaining what they were and basically saying, here's what's probably going to happen in the United States unless we do these things. And since then, I've had, and these are like just, Kiwanis, come on. It's not like that's like some radical left-wing group, right? And I've had people since then be like, God, I just keep thinking back to that presentation you gave. And it's just like, you were just spot on about it. And I'm like, yeah, it's not that complicated. Like, it's really not. So that to say, there's been like lots of missteps. The CDC is misstep. I mean, there's just been a ton of missteps from the very beginning. But I just want to take us all back to like February, March-ish. And what were people doing when we found out that this virus had hit the U.S. shores? They were going into the stores and buying up every roll of freaking toilet paper. Yep. And all of the masks. People were like stockpiling masks that were desperately needed for healthcare workers, right? And so, and at the time, they really didn't know if masks were going to be effective. And the biggest reason why, when somebody tells you they're worried about masks not working, it's because of human behavior. It's like condoms. They don't, and I've brought this up before. Condoms are not 100% effective because of user error. People are stupid and they do dumb things. So, if you wear your mask and it's under your nose, that's not going to work, right? Like, so, if you're wearing the mask with the spikes in it, you just poked holes in the fabric. Like, that's not going to work. So all of those kinds of things. So I think the initial messaging was, we don't really want, look what all the Americans are doing. They're hoarding all the toilet paper. Mm-hmm. They're doing all the crazy things Americans do when they're in crisis. We're going to just say, you know what, like probably hold off on the masks because it's probably just going to make things worse. One, either Americans are going to hoard all the masks and they're not going to get to where they need to go. Mm-hmm. And or two, they're going to use them inappropriately. And then that's just going to create more problems. But then obviously that was a mistake. They should have from the beginning said masks can be effective if they're worn in certain ways. And then I think about just even dating back to like April, if like Governor Nome had put on a mask if President Trump had put on a mask and just put on a mask, you don't even have to mandate it. Just start modeling that behavior from the very beginning. This would be a totally different outcome. Like yesterday, I was in Spearfish, went into a coffee shop, no mask, not even the employees wearing masks. Then I was in Lead. I had to go to a meeting, no mask, nobody in the meeting except for me was wearing a mask. I stayed in a hotel. I got dirty looks from people walking in the hotel wearing a mask. And I had to go over there for meetings and some other stuff. And so just like, have we just said, fuck it and we're done? Like, I don't understand. Like, that's my thing. So my public service announcement is everybody still needs to wear masks. And Biden is asking for everybody to kind of step up and do their patriotic duty and wear a mask for the next 100 days. And, you know, again, I think about like, if this were like the 1940s and, or, you know, and we were like in the throes of World War II and people were told to ration like the way that they were, and we had the attitudes we have now, then imagine, I'm trying to think like, what would have happened? Like, what would be the outcome? You know, I think like, maybe that's how Man in the High Castle happens, right? Because, like,
yeah, I mean, it just, and I did a out and back to Brookings today for work, and I, you know, I stopped a couple of times, and, you know, the one gas station I went into, you know, the employees were wearing masks, but the patrons, it was like, yeah, 50-50. But then when I got to campus, I just ran into some other employees outside, and we were all wearing masks, even though we were outdoors. So I had, you know, sort of limited exposure to campus, but I think that at least there, you know, the culture of masking is a lot better, because they've been, you know, the Board of Regents has been actually pretty strong from the start, you know, when it came to masking on their campuses and their facilities. And yeah, I mean, Noam was able to put a mask on her face for the goddamn inauguration. So clearly,
all right, that's like another thing,
right? Like,
how they're going. Like, what are you trying to do?
Like, but, you know, as soon as she, you know, rarely steps foot in South Dakota, like, she just cannot put a mask on her face. So yeah, everybody, wear a mask, please. I know, you know, and the whole vaccine thing, like, that
was the next thing I was going to bring up. So you just got your first shot, right? So wait, okay, well, I guess we should explain that, because both of us clearly are not in and I mean, you could look at us and be like, they're not high risk. Why are they in the vaccine? Amanda and I were
bodies to science.
Yeah. So in case you've all missed us talking about this in the past, both Amanda and I recruited her, were in the COVID vaccine trials. I was with, Rami just commented, she wore a mask, didn't post a picture of it, just a picture of her gloves. Yes, I'm really confused about the glove thing. But I saw a tweet that the person who knitted the gloves, Bernie Sanders, is all out of gloves. I guess people have been requesting them. So I'm hoping she'll like post the pattern maybe, and people can start knitting those gloves, because those are pretty awesome. But the vaccine, so we're both in the vaccine trial. I ended up being in the Pfizer trial. Amanda was in the Moderna trial. I'm pretty sure I got the vaccine, but I don't know for sure yet. I've called and left a message, and then, you know, they're just swamped with phone calls. But if you were and I haven't gotten any emails to say I'm placebo. So that's also kind of my clue, knowing people in the placebo group getting emails. So yeah, right. So you just got your first shot.
Yeah. So
you look like you're okay.
Right. Yeah. So the Moderna trial, they were unblinding participants. And what that means is they were telling, you know, essentially, if you wanted to, they would tell you which treatment you were, if you were the vaccine side of the treatment, or if you were the placebo side of the treatment. And then if you were the vaccine side, they would unblind you, and then you can, you know, continue with the study, because they are, you know, still wanting to, you know, monitor folks so we can see how long the antibodies last, how long protection lasts, you know, all that fun stuff, you know. And the initial trial was to follow us for 2 years. And if they unblind you and you're in the placebo group, they would then do a couple more things and then offer you the vaccine. And so I had called in end of December when they sent out the email saying, hey, this is how we got the FDA emergency use authorization. This is how we're going to treat our study participants. And so I called the office and was like, hey, I'm interested in unblinding, you know, just let me know whenever. And last Wednesday, they called me and they're like, can you come down on Saturday? I'm like, hell yes, I can. I will be there whenever you need me to be. Because I was fairly certain that I had been in the placebo group. And I'm like, I'm just at this point, dodging legislators, in Pierre during session. It's a whole bunch of plague rats, thinking I was going to have to try to make it to March without, exposing myself to COVID. I was suddenly becoming much more high risk. But the nice thing about being unblinded in the study, it's great that I was able to, definitely get the vaccine sort of earlier than I would have been able to otherwise. Also, keep in mind, everyone out there, following along at home, like they took a lot of blood from us in September when we had our 2 other shots and stuff. And the things that we did helped helped have enough data so that, we could get the emergency use authorization in December. So I feel like it was a pretty fair trade-off for us putting ourselves on the line. Like we finally get access to the vaccine. But had I been like, people in the study who were like healthcare workers and who were getting offered the vaccine at their job, like if they ended up getting, say, a Pfizer vaccine and they were in the Moderna trial, they would no longer be able to continue participating in the study. So the nice thing about unblinding the participants is all that data that they've collected on us since the very beginning, by unblinding us and vaccinating us, they can keep us in the study and then continue to follow us for the full 2 years. So I'm still participating, still going to have blood taken and all that fun stuff. Try not to pass out on them. But yeah, I go back in February for my second shot, and I hear the second shot is the doozy. But the first shot for me was really just somewhere between like a flu shot and a tetanus shot. It wasn't, and my arm hurt for about a day and a half, and then it was fine. So, and for whatever the study protocol, they put it in my non-dominant arm. They like refused to put it in my right arm because I was like hearing all the things like, oh, put it in your dominant arm because you use it more and then it'll hurt less. But per the study protocols, they had to put it in my case, in my left arm. So yeah, I'm halfway vaccinated, and folks in the community, I know the vaccine rollout has been, I think we're up to phase like 1D as in Delta, and Sanford and Avera have been sending things out in the mail and via their apps, like their different like MyChart apps. So, public service announcement in South Dakota, if those are your healthcare providers, like make sure that your means of communication are up to date so that when the vaccine is available, that you are able to, go and get it, as soon as it's available to you. Because that's, that and masking are like the 2 ways we're going to get out of this thing. So.
Yeah, because you can just log in. If you log into your MyChart account with Monument, you can schedule your appointment that way. Because if you call your provider, you can't. They're just too overwhelmed to do that.
They're swamped.
So, yeah, and I'm actually really hoping with the response plan coming out of the federal government that there'll be some guidance in terms of having like national. It's like. So kind of going back to Noam being at the inauguration, she posed for pictures with our South Dakota National Guard members who were there to security detail for the inauguration. And I'm like, they wouldn't have been there in the first place if you hadn't been participating in this, spreading of these lies about the election being stolen and everything else. And, when you're in the Guard or the reserves, and you get activated, you're walking away from your job, which obviously you can go back to. But, like if you're a teacher, like I saw a picture of this guy who's a teacher somewhere in the US, he was Zooming with his students from inside the armored vehicle that he was in, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of cool, but it's also like really messed up, and it's disruptive to so many people's lives. It's disruptive. And I can speak from experience because my husband's in the reserves, like, it's disruptive to your family. It's like you have to leave your job. It's just not, and I feel like she's just kind of this like fiddly-dee, like we'll disactivate the Guard for whatever. Like, oh, look, there's some, Native people protesting in the Black Hills. Better get the National Guard and charge them with like riot boosting kind of stuff. And then, so it's just this like that just irritates me. So anyway, however, using the National Guard for mass testing, that was a great idea. And I know it was kind of sponsored by a corporation who came and helped pay for that, but that was like super efficient. We drove into there were like lanes to drive into at the armory, and they just, you register online, you show them your barcode, they like hand you the swab, you stick it up your nose, you put it in the thing, and you hand it to them, and you drive out, and you're in and out of there in a few minutes. And I mean, voter registration, driver's license, all of these we have all these ways of reaching people where you could send a letter and just say, okay, we're going to have mass vaccinations. And this is what I'm really hoping they do once they get through like all these like special populations. But even with that, they have we have all of this big data. We've got the information. It's just it's the will to actually like put in that effort and probably some money to figure out how to do it, right? Because even within the healthcare system, they could figure out like who are those high risk individuals and then prioritize them with a mailing or an email to say your last name falls between L and P. So you will go at this is the time slot for you to show up at this place to, get your first vaccine, bring some kind of ID. Right. So then they can at least track you and tell you when your next time is. Or schools. Like I think about like when the schools get to that point, like they've got all the parents on it. You could get a text message. This is the time slot, and just try to, have people lined up in a gym and just kind of efficiently do it, which I know they did when they did like polio vaccinations. And so it's baffling to me. And then the fact that like vaccines are being thrown away because they're not getting refrigerated properly, or the crazy person, that pharmacist who like purposely left them out on the counter to make them inactive. I'm just like, oh my God. So get a vaccine when it's your turn, roll up your sleeve and just do your part. That's what I'm going to say right now. And now we need to like get on with what we wanted to do.
Well, and so when you're going through the list of things of things that we have data on people, and you talked about voter registration, that was like my mental sieg to one of the bills that is up this year is to allow for online voter registration in South Dakota.
Yes.
And I want to say it's sponsored by one of the like government, like this is not a thing that like Democrats have brought forward. Like it's actually coming from, the call is coming from the House. Yeah,
it's coming from our state. Yeah.
So
who is not a flaming liberal.
Right? It might have a chance this year.
Well, and I read that it was actually introduced last year too, and it passed the House, but it failed the Senate. But there was no negative testimony against it. But it didn't even make it out of committee in the Senate, like 7-2. So I really don't know like what it is, and because I just went and read about it, like because the Secretary of State introduced it again, and he said there was no opposition testimony last year about this. So he's still kind of like, I don't get what the big deal is, that it's actually even more, and I have some concerns or questions. It's even more secure than it would be if you did current voter registration, because when you register online, you would be required to submit your social security number and have a valid driver's license in South Dakota. And so I'm assuming then if you don't have a valid driver's license, but you have some other form of official legal ID, you could go and register in person or do the whole kind of affidavit thing. But what's really great about this with the online voter registration, and the committee is tomorrow morning at 10, and there is a way to submit remote testimony, although I don't know if we've passed the deadline for that, what the rules are for that.
Yeah, so for remote testimony, I believe you have to submit your request 24 hours before the committee meets. So one thing, and Bree, are you going to do the screen sharing?
Yeah, let me do that.
Okay, because I can kind of narrate the LRC website. But so South Dakota, for as many times as I think that we're still in the 20th century instead of the 21st, the Legislative Research Council, the LRC.
Amanda, can you see the screen? Is it sharing?
No, I can't see it.
Oh, okay. Hang on.
But our LRC website is absolutely fantastic. Like this is, oh my God, it's Inception. All right, now I can see it. Yep. So this is where to go to find like what committees are meeting when, what their agenda is. You can also, there's the handy links there to like where it's broadcast. So SD.net, SDPB broadcasts a lot of like all of the committee hearings. They will broadcast the floor sessions. You can go back and see, the minutes and just everything you could possibly want to know about the legislature is on the LRC website. You can also make a My LRC account, and then you can add bills to your My LRC account and like track bills, track statute. Like it's a super powerful tool. And if you're, and because this is the thing, is our session is 40 days. It goes super fucking fast. And committees change their agendas sometimes really quickly. Bills, especially if they're near sort of the end of the agenda, might get, bumped to like the next day the committee meets. So the fact that we even have the capacity for remote testimony this year it's great because obviously COVID precautions, like the legislature is kind of a cesspool. Like, as a citizen driving, the distance to peer and then going into those rooms, it's iffy proposition this year. But yeah, so remote testimony, your request has to get in 24 hours before the committee would meet. You can also submit written testimony if you would like. And then there's the remote either via Microsoft Teams, and then I believe there's a phone option. So like I'm hoping that the use of technology this year, even when we're not in a pandemic, that they realize that this is a good thing. I'm guessing they probably fucking won't, because it's going to allow more people potentially to testify, because you remove that barrier of having to travel to peer in January and February and March when the weather is complete shit sometimes.
And so you can also, you can send an email. So like, obviously we've missed the deadline for tomorrow to do remote testimony. If you want to submit your comments about whether or not you support online voter registration. And so that will be in, what committee is that going to be?
So I did just get a League of Women Voters email about this issue. Let me just look at it on my phone here real quick. They hopefully, but yes, you don't have to. Yeah, you don't have to testify, but you can always submit comments to the committee. And so, action alert, online voter registration. Here we go. It's Senate Bill 24, and it is in Senate State Affairs.
Senate State Affairs.
And there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are nine committee members. So even if one of your representatives is not on the committee, email them anyway, or email the committee anyway, even if they're not your legislator. Like so in my case,
I have the committee page open. So this is what the committee pages look like. So this is the Senate State Affairs Committee. And so you can see these are the members. And if you click on their name, it'll take you to their spot, and then you can click on their email and you can send an email. But the other thing too is that you pretty much all of them, it's going to be their first name and then their last name for their email address. And then you can send an email to all of them and just voice your concerns or your opinion about it. And then up here you'll see you'll be able to see what the agenda is going to be for that meeting. And like Amanda said, there's a PDF. Usually there's like an HTML version, and if they've already met, there will be records, so you can go back and you can see what was there, and you can see what bills have been assigned to that committee. So you can see there's quite a few actually in this one. There's, and a lot of these are just kind of like the run-of-the-mill things that governance, that we need the government to do, like making decisions about the former Star Academy. But here's the one about provide voter registration, and so here's the other piece about this in terms of online voter registration. Currently to register to vote in South Dakota, you either have to go into like a county auditor's office to do that, or you have to, you can do it when you get your driver's license, when you're of age, or you can fill out paperwork when you go to like a social services office, like if you're getting WIC or, any kind of like food stamp benefits, all those kinds of things. And then you can also, like, if you're in an Army or military recruiter office, you can also do it. Like if you're kind of doing the whole, like you just graduate high school or whenever, and you're doing your enlisting, there's also a piece there. And I think there's got to be one other department that I'm forgetting. But I worked as an election worker this year, and in actuality, we had people come in who, they weren't on the rolls. They said they'd registered to vote, but they weren't on the rolls. And so what that means then is that we fill out, we document that, we get their information, and we give them a provisional ballot. And and we document like, well, where did you register to vote? And more often than not, they said they did it through social services. And so that means that, and if we looked at across every county in the state, and you consistently see this as a problem where somebody goes in to get WIC, for example, and they say they want to register to vote, and they fill out a piece of paper, and then that paper gets filed somewhere in that office and then never actually makes it back to the Secretary of State's office, you end up with a lot of people who are disenfranchised and can't participate in voting. And it's even more concerning to me because there's going to be a disproportionate number of people then who are low income and probably not white who are also being disenfranchised because of that lack of communication between those departments. And it is 2021. So the other piece of this to me in terms of that online voter registration is like, it just kind of like takes out all of that middleman kind of weirdness with paper. And because otherwise all of these departments need to figure out how to actually be in the 21st century and communicate electronically to share that information. Because what happens is then the clerks have to go and look up, they have to make a phone call. They literally call those departments and say, hey, do you have this paperwork lying around? And have to like figure it out to verify it, so they can determine whether or not that ballot is valid or not. And so that to me is a huge piece of this. And then what would be really great is then if you were 16 and you went in to get your driver's license, you could say, when I turn 18, please switch me over to registered voter. And then you just like kind of reserve your spot. And then you'd have like so many more people able to participate.
I mean, crazy, the idea of wanting more people to participate in democracy. I mean, that is truly...
Yeah. I think what I saw today is that there's probably about 50,000 people who are eligible to vote in South Dakota that are not currently registered to vote. And that's a big deal when we talk about local elections. For example, the marijuana initiatives passed in Hughes County by 2 votes. So you think about, and then, think about some like state elections where it's like, it's by 65 to 100 votes kind of deal often in terms of people, whether or not they win or not. And so having, and I think about like, well, and like, who are those 50,000 people in terms of having more representation of our population in the legislature? It's just a good thing to have people registered to vote.
Yeah. So Senate Bill 24, and one thing, so the national politics for like the past 4 years has sucked up a lot of oxygen, and in South Dakota, one of the things that I try to do as a Democrat and a county chair, and with some of the other online groups I'm a member of, is get people to kind of switch their focus from the national politics to state politics for these 40 days in January, February, and March. Because in South Dakota, every bill that is submitted is guaranteed a hearing in committee. Committees might kill a lot of these bills, but every bill that the legislators write, it ends up in a committee somewhere. And so we just get a whole lot of shit. Like we're the testing grounds for a lot of ALEC legislation. We're definitely the proving ground for a lot of far right legislation. And your legislators, they don't want to admit that in Cracker Barrels, but like you can definitely search some of the language, and it will come up with other states where these same things are being being submitted, because your bill is guaranteed a hearing in a committee in South Dakota, and that's more than what happens in some other states. So that's minorly terrifying. It's just definitely a fire hose of information, and some of this stuff is just such shitty legislation that it should not ever make it out of committee. And so there's a lot of different organizations that send out action alerts about legislation. So Dakota Rural Action is one of them if you're, sort of interested in the environmental land use kind of side of things. The South Dakota Democratic Party, League of Women Voters, all sorts of organizations, send out action alerts about bills, because they all have, either lobbyists or staff members or somebody who is, stalking the LRC, paying attention to bill language and figuring out, which bills, their constituents are going to care about. When you get that action alert, like, please do something with it. Call your legislator, email your legislator. make a plan to testify. And, like we said, with the deadlines for remote testimony, like, make that decision 24 hours before the committee meets and get your request in. But the South Dakota legislature moves so fast that we need people to be engaged during session. So, like, we had our celebration, like President Biden is in, like, ignore that for like the next 40 days. Put your mask on your face, get your shot, sort of, trust that like the rest, Washington, D.C. isn't burning down, and really set your focus on the South Dakota legislature, because a lot of them think that they can just get away with a lot of shit because they're like, oh, people don't care. And I know so many people care, and it can be tough because there's just a lot happening. But the sort of early legislation that we're seeing, there's definitely stuff that's coming out or, coming down the pike about abortion. There's always trans rights issues, and they're getting more subtle about it. Like Bree and I were talking about one. Is it the name change bill?
No, this is a different one. Oh, so yeah, they're getting more subtle about it. So I just want to like point this out. Actually, we'll back up because this is the other cool thing about the LRC website. And I only just learned this year, which is funny because I would like sit and scroll through every bill and like lose hours of sleep because I would just be obsessed about it. But you can click on the 2021 bills, and then obviously they're sorted by, House or Senate or joint resolutions. By the way, I just saw when we were looking back at that, the Senate State of Affairs Committee, that there's like some resolution to like strongly urge our members of Congress in DC to oppose any legislation related to DC statehood, which obviously is about them. That means it's just really what it means is Republicans don't want DC to become a state because they'd be guaranteed to have Democrats in their seats. And so it's like, when this whole like states' rights, but then, like, well, but not for you, like, no, You can't do that. Kind of like with the whole national election. Oh, well, no, you can't, your votes don't count kind of deal. It's super hypocritical. And it's ironic because South Dakota was rushed into statehood so that there could be more Republican seats in Congress after the Civil War. I mean, it's just like it's so weird to know the history and then to see to see that. And really, it's like, well, we shouldn't be meddling in the affairs of Washington, D.C. citizens. Like that's their right to petition that request for statehood. So anyway, when you go into the LRC and look at the bills, there's this option where you can click here, it says filter, and you can type in a word search. So for example, like Amanda said, they're getting trickier about this. And, so she mentioned ALEC, which is this conservative think tank that pretty much kind of creates these like boilerplate legislation type documents and sends them out to their members. There's also the National Prayer Caucus, which does the same thing. And there used to be the project used to be called Project Blitz. And I think they've gotten a little bit more like covert about it. But basically, they would literally mail boilerplate legislation to receptive legislators. And it would be this kind of gamut of things that are like, on the surface look kind of benign, like, hey, let's get all the schools to get plaques that say, "In God we trust." What's the big deal about that? To things that are like super extreme on the other end in terms of like banning gay marriage, anti-transgender, abortion, all these issues. And really what they were actually honestly hoping for is that some of these bills would be so outrageous that they would get taken to court and they'd make it to the Supreme Court, where they would then be, then that law would be upheld if you had a conservative enough Supreme Court. And so there's this big, long game kind of gambit that's being played at the expense of people. And really, this legislation is harmful to people in so many ways. Like yesterday, I went to court with a young adult who I know for moral support who turned 18 and wanted to legally change their name and their gender and officially change their gender to non-binary. And it happened here in South Dakota. And so I typed in, so if you type in this filter, I'm going to type in transgender and nothing shows up. So then I was like, all right, what would be some other words that might show up here? I'm going to type in sex. Oh, look, there's one. Require that birth certificates reflect biological sex. Okay, Amanda's a PhD entomology. I've got a PhD in science education. I mean, we could go on a whole thing about
Like there's
biology of reproduction and
oh,
human chromosomes, but that's
yep.
for another night.
Like
So
I would
first,
love to karyotype the entire legislature, especially like
yeah.
just
And so what's interesting actually is that this individual was born in another state and their birth certificate has X. They got a new birth certificate and they just put X for gender because that's what they requested. And that, so the fact that it's just like, I mean, this is so bizarre because first of all, I mean, even just setting aside the whole like crazy, and of course, look who introduced it, Representative Deutsch. I mean,
I was gonna say,
it's like he has this creepy fetish obsession with this topic. I mean, it really is like, I feel like, and if I was a mother of a transgender child, I'd be like going after him for child abuse. Like, this is just really creepy kind of on his part. Like, it's just every year he's relentless about this. And so, just for a primer, like, we have chromosomes that determine our biological sex in terms of like reproductive organs and so on. But not everybody is, some people are born with parts of both systems and or have there's a whole kind of spectrum of what that biological sex looks like. We're not all equal and the same. And that's because we sexually reproduce, which means we have a diverse gene pool. And so there's always going to be variations in that. And so, it's not, that's why it also is totally, within reason from a scientific perspective to recognize that there are going to be individuals that might be born with female genitalia or male genitalia, but not like everything else about their how their body is hardwired, their brain, their everything, that is not who they are. And that's basically what this is about. It's like denying people from being their authentic selves. And who does it harm to let people just be who they are? Like, that's the part of this that just like starts getting me upset. So this is kind of interesting. And then there was the one about the name change.
Yeah, and one thing too with sort of all of these, especially the anti-trans bills and like the abortion bills, is, for the Republicans to be like, we're the party of small government and personal freedom. Like, what? I'm not sure how you square, personal freedom with, wanting to essentially like have somebody like stamp their vulva on a birth certificate to prove that, they're the gender you think they are. It's all very strange. And I know it's the Venn diagram of where all this intersects with, white nationalism, like Christianity and just things. But yeah, it's I know it's exhausting for, our LGBTQIA two-spirit community, to have these bills come up every goddamn year. And this is why we need better people in the legislature. So, think back to the election in your district in 2020, like who ran, who didn't run, how close it was, like start thinking about who you want to put on that ticket in 2022, because somebody like Fred Deutsch, I don't know when he's termed out. You can find that on the LRC. It's in there somewhere. There's a PDF of, where all the legislators are in their various terms. But I don't think there was anybody that ran against him, and he does this shit every single year. And so, that's, one way to stop some of these bills is to make sure that the legislators that sponsor them aren't even, in the legislature. And then the other way is to kill them in committee, before they get to the House or the Senate floor. And I will say, if you don't already follow the South Dakota ACLU on social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, definitely do so. They had some really great infographics on their Instagram stories the other day about how a bill becomes a law in South Dakota, like a really nice flow chart that you could like sort of, so if you're more of like a visual learner, like how to like see the process, going through the committee, passing, the House or the Senate floor, and then flipping over to the other side and, going through the process again, and then either being, like signed by the governor, veto overridden, all that fun stuff. But, Kristi Noem thinks that we don't have enough civics education in this state. So those of us who are adult learners, bone up on your civics because there's, and instead of using that knowledge to storm the Capitol, I'm gonna have to wear the like Riot Booster t-shirt again because I feel like a lot of the knowledge that we're dropping on these sessions, like I feel like Ian Fury or Christy Nome is gonna find us and be like, you guys are inciting a riot.
Yeah, we should just start wearing that every Thursday. I
Yeah.
did laundry and I was like, where is my shirt? I'm not sure where it is. I gotta find it. So this is the other one. There's this like I don't even know what the point of this one is. So this is again one of these like weird like micromanagement type deals. So it's a bill to first of all put like really restrict kind of what kind of ID you can use when you go to file to get a marriage license. And I'm really not sure like why she wrote this bill. Like if I mean, has there really been a whole lot of fraud with people filing for marriage licenses? Like I just is this like people pretending there's somebody to get them? I don't know. I just don't get it. It's kind of weird. And you already have to have like photo ID and kind of, when you go in to get one, but the bill is written in a way where it's like really limited in terms of specifics about what kind of ID you can use. So it used to say, what it currently says is proof of age may be satisfied by providing a certified copy of a birth certificate or any photographic identification, which includes the applicant's name and date of birth. But now the person introducing this bill is from Chamberlain, and she wants to say you have to either use a passport, a federal, state, military, or tribal photo ID, a birth certificate along with a current school or employee photo ID, or have a U.S. Department of Treasury Form 4029 that is completed. I was like, well, I don't understand. Like, why does it have to be enumerated? But the other piece of this, too, that's really weird is this next part where basically the bill says that you either have to use your surname or your partner's surname or a hyphenated combination, but you can't make a new name, and you're not allowed to change your first name or last or middle name as a part of this process. Again, I'm not really sure what the point of this is. Like, there's a whole thing with our legislator too, where they pass these, they put in bills because they're like anticipating some weird thing that's going to happen, and it's like, well, we just need to be prepared kind of thing. And it's like, but you're creating a problem that doesn't really exist. Like, this isn't really a thing. And so this is why, like, this one I'm scratching my head at, like, is this really just some kind of, again, like side-eye dig at people like legally changing their name because they're transgender and they're getting married? Like, I'm trying to figure it out. But it's also super culturally insensitive because there are a lot of people like in Latinx cultures, like in the Philippines, where it's common practice to take your name, especially for women, to take your maiden name and make it your middle name when you take your husband's name. And so this would basically mean you couldn't do that. And and you wouldn't be allowed to make your own new last name, which I think is really stupid. Like, we did that with our daughter. Because I was like, I was the one pregnant for 9 months. Like, why is it she gets the man's name? Like, like, really? And then we're like, well, we don't want to hyphenate her name. Like, that's just like, that's a lot of words. So we made a new last name for her and we put it on her birth certificate, and it's totally legal. And we just we took parts of our names and made a new name. So, and again, it's like, whose business is it other than ours? Like, why does this matter? Like, and what is the whole point of spending money in terms of legislating and, like mandating this for people, especially like if you're going to go to court, like you can change your name when you get a divorce, and there's no rules to say you can change your first name or your middle name in that process. I mean, if you're already doing a legal name change affidavit, why does it matter?
You've probably just given them ideas on how to amend this legislation because, clearly women shouldn't be getting divorced either. Like, you should be stuck with that name. Honestly, I'm a little bit surprised they didn't like try to mandate that, like, when you get married that you have to change your name, because that's, there are a lot of women who don't change the name, which makes divorce a lot easier.
Last year, Tony Randolph from Rapid City did introduce a marriage bill that had someone.
Yeah, that was, and so this is also where I get a little bit conflicted on some of these, because some of the bills that get introduced are just so outrageous. I'm like, just, like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, did you really just submit that?
And you kind of hope that like the more moderate Republicans will just kind of be like, oh my God. So that's actually my joke right now. Like I just noticed that, and Tony Randolph's like he's pretty much still kind of a freshman member of our legislature. He's the chair now of the House Veterans Committee. And I'm like, well, maybe that's kind of a safe place to put him. Because what kind of trouble can you get in like overseeing legislation that deals specifically with like veterans and, like appropriations for like facilities, structures for National Guard or whatever, like, like, okay, like, I mean, and that's not to say he can't still introduce some crazy legislation, but, yeah. So anyway, this filter feature is really handy. It's kind of middle of the page for you to do searches. You can kind of just do like you could do on like if you're wondering about healthcare or type in health, and the more vague the better, obviously, because it's going to run what's so there's going to be legislation right now relating and to all right. I need somebody to explain this to me. And maybe this is something we're going to need to get like a member of the legislature to do. What is up with this declare an emergency? Like every other bill says declare an emergency. I'm like, is it though?
So like, what that means. So normally when a bill passes and is signed into law, it goes into effect on July 1st of that year. So bills that pass sort of normally in this session will go into effect on July 1st, 2021. If you in your bill declare an emergency, as soon as that bill is signed into law, it goes into effect.
Okay. So that makes sense then, because I'm like, what is up with all this emergency? Like, and there's actually some really good health related bills right now. So like one for, mental health insurance for first responders. I saw some others that was kind of like looking at like some kind of professional development, not necessarily professional development, but just more resources in terms of helping like to address like the stress that first responders are under in the work that they do, which is great. And then I've seen some that are related to, the state is changing their employee health plan, which we've talked about before. And it's pretty crappy overall in terms of how that's been revised for our state employees. And then, so there's like, I don't know, like right now, I feel like there's not too many horrible bills, but they have about a week left, right? To introduce new legislation.
They've got pretty much a week to introduce sort of whatever the hell they want. And then after that point, they can only, I think, introduce like 3 more bills. And then I want to say that there's a date in February where it's like, crossover day where everything has to have, made it out of committee and to, the other side. So right now we're in like the fire hose of legislation being introduced. And then it's going to be working its way through the committees, and hopefully some of this stuff gets just nuked from orbit. But and there are committees that don't have any Democrats on them, so it'll be interesting to see, how some of those votes in committee go. Like that's just going to be a wild ride.
Yes. So again, that online voter registration is in committee tomorrow. I kind of looked at my calendar. I'm like, again, this is also why it's like, I've been vaccinated. I could totally like risk going to this committee meeting. Because I feel like, they should hear, I want to be able to share that story about when I was working as an election worker and what I observed. And, I just, it's just really, cause it's kind of, and it's just such a crappy position to be in when somebody comes in wanting to vote and then they can't because somebody didn't turn in a piece of paper from somewhere where, you could have. And, that's the other piece of this though, because like certain polling places in South, this is what I'm actually hoping will come of this if this passes. Certain polling places in South Dakota are called polling centers, and they have computers. And so everything like in Pierre is one of those places where you come in and it's all computerized. We can actually scan your ID and you come up on the screen. We can verify that you are who you are. And by the way, you are allowed to vote in South Dakota without ID on you. If you forget it, you are allowed to vote by law. You have to be let vote. You fill out an affidavit declaring you are who you are. And, and if it's on a computer, I can ask you a question, like, and get some information that clearly you're probably the person you're claiming you are. And it's really, yeah. So we'll just move on with that one, because all the things that Noam said about voter security in South Dakota, I'm like, she doesn't even know that technically you can vote in South Dakota without your ID. But what I'm really hoping will come out of this is that you could have somebody designated to do on same day online voter registration, right? So because I had a ton of like recently turned 18-year-olds who didn't know that they again came in super excited to vote, and they didn't know that they needed to go and register and do all these things first, and that they had to do it by a certain deadline. And so, and I was like, well, we've got all these computers. Why aren't we doing same day voter registration? Like, and you could still say, we're going to register you and give you a provisional ballot, so we have time to, really like do all the triple checks and make sure you're legal to vote. But, there's no, and many states do that. So there are a lot of states that have same day voter registration and might also have some provisions in terms of like how they separate those ballots from the others before they get counted. And that, by the way, too, like I think there were like 8 of us working there. We all had to sign everything gets signed. We check, like we accounted for all of those provisional ballots. We account for destroyed ballots. Like if somebody got a ballot in the mail but wanted to vote in person, like we document all of that. So, certainly mistakes can be made, but there are so many checks put in place to protect the integrity of elections. Even in the states where it didn't go the way Republicans wanted it to go. It's just kind of like that. That's why I was excited about this legislation actually coming from the Secretary of State's office, because I feel like it is the right thing to do. And hopefully it won't be turned into this kind of stupid political showboating based on what happened in November.
Well, and it's just, it still boggles my mind that there is like one party that thinks that making voting easier for people is a bad thing. Like that still just blows my mind. Just blows my mind. And that being in favor of, voting rights and vote, accessibility to, to the ballot, that makes you some sort of, super left flaming liberal. It's bonkers. Like oh man. I was telling Bree before we went live, I've been listening to Barack Obama's new memoir, A Promised Land. And I just finished the section where he's, the run up to his first election, running against McCain and Palin, and just like the things, like when he went over the whole Sarah Palin thing, the things he mentioned, I'm like, oh my God, like that truly, like that just set the stage, and things started coming out of the woodwork. And it's like, and now having survived the Trump era, it's like you can look back and just see all of these things. And so, yeah, total sidetrack, but the plans were laid there for a very long time. And I really hope that a whole bunch of, Republicans decide that they love their country more than they love power.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, we got we've been on for almost an hour, but I just thought like, yeah, today, like if you're on Twitter, somebody worth following is Greta Thunberg from Sweden. She's the young woman, climate change activist who Trump was a complete douche to, and like, trolled her pretty harshly, which he does to everybody. But she's just like,
not anymore, because he doesn't have Twitter.
I know. And so it's like she's just been kind of waiting. Like it's been amazing. So like he like did this whole like patronizing, oh, she's like this, there was some dismissive comment tweet he made about her last year or 2 years ago that, was like, put her down for her age, all of, like she's just this young kid, what does she know, and hope she has this happy life kind of thing. And she basically just like flipped that quote around for him with a picture of him getting on Marine One. It's just so funny. It's like she's just been waiting patiently for this to like Yeah, and that was great. And then, Ted Cruz just needs to just I don't know, go away, because then he made some tweet today about the Paris Accord, going back into the Paris
Yeah.
Accord for climate change, but he referenced something about like Biden cares more about the citizens of Paris than he does the United States.
Yeah, and then I saw the reply to that where somebody like quote tweeted it, and they're like, wait, does he think that the Geneva Convention, like, that was only the citizens of Geneva?
I know, like, it's just so funny. I was just like, okay, you just need to stop talking. Like,
Yeah,
just stop.
just zip it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be back here next Thursday with, probably some more state legislation to talk about. And in the meantime, wear your mask, get your shot if you can, and go to the LRC website and see what's happening in committee and with your legislators, so that you are ready to give them some feedback if they're doing any virtual or socially distanced Cracker Barrels coming up in your area.
Right. Thank you. Good night.